This week, we take a look at the recent and the perennial controversy over the dress of Muslim women. The hijab or khimar has been subject to ferocious scrutiny, with YouTube influencers, journalists, politicians and academics all participating in what is now a regular feature in how liberal society would like Muslims to live. We at the Thinking Muslim podcast thought long and hard about addressing the subject, but it is clear that many young Muslim women are confused, in large part because of the deluge of noise that comes their way on social networks. So to address the subject, Farhat Amin from our sister podcast, A Muslim Mum, spoke to Eeman Abbasi, a writer and academic that recently penned a brilliant piece titled Not My Body, Not My Choice for the online magazine Traversing Tradition. Farhat is part of the Thinking Muslim project and is currently working with a group of Muslim women writers to put together a groundbreaking book providing an intelligent critique of feminism. Inshallah, next week I shall be speaking to Farhat and Imam Iyad Hilal from America to address the wider political debates around the hijab, as well as the legislative understanding that comes from Quran and Sunnah about the khimar or the hijab.
Assalamu alaikum, Iman, and welcome to A Muslim Mum podcast.
Wa alaikum assalam. Jazakallah khair for having me.
Alhamdulillah. So the title of your piece, it was quite unusual. I've heard the slogan, my body, my choice before, but the phrase, not my body, not my choice, that's something you don't hear very often. So could you, inshallah, explain why did you write this piece?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think me, like many other Muslim girls, when we were growing up, there were very few public hijabis that existed in the public consciousness who could make hijab really relevant to us and demonstrate different techniques of wrapping it, how to pin it, how to wear it to different occasions. And a lot of us learned a lot from them. But increasingly over the past few years, what we're noticing is that many of these bloggers or influencers have begun to take off their hijabs. And some of the rhetoric that they cite in doing so is that now it's important for them to speak their own truth, and whatever they wear on their bodies is their own choice, right? So they echo this slogan of my body, my choice. And what I've observed is that definitely over the past few months, particularly, Muslim women, not just young ones, are beginning to get confused by these type of slogans, right? What does it mean for something to be your body? And what does it mean to make your own choices in this way? And so I thought it was really important to kind of address this topic. And I did so through this article that I wrote for Traversing Tradition, which is a publication that some of my friends and I started, and it really attempts to be this bridge between, just laymen who want to learn more about Islam and the ulama who might not be, following these influencers and might not have their pulse on these day-to-day issues that we're facing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like the fact that in a website Traversing Tradition that you critique, ideas through a Muslim worldview, that looking at ideas and then seeing, okay, the modern philosophies that we are being asked to adopt, that you don't just accept it, that you're doing a rational critique of it and judging, is it in line with Islam or not? And that's what I really liked about, your website. I did read a couple of other articles as well. So now going back to yours in particular, so you mentioned the word confusion, and I do think nowadays that if, let's say a sister, she wants to start to cover and she wants to find out, is hijab an obligation? And then how should I wear it? I think going online is a very confusing place for us, for Muslim women now, because we are being told, things that contradict what has always been known in Islam. And when I say that, I mean, traditional Islamic scholarship has always categorically mentioned that, wearing the khimar is an obligation, and then the outer garment, jilbab, as well. But what you now have is people like, for example, Mona El-Tahawi in her book, Headscarves and Hymens. She, it's interesting that she spoke about how she used to wear hijab and then how she unveiled. And the people she cites are, for example, Layla Ahmed, who is a Harvard professor, and Farhat Amin, who is a Moroccan feminist. Now, both of them, they're writers and they've studied the subject of women in Islam, but they're not Islamic scholars. And so are you finding that there are people like that? You know, there's the example of Samina Ali as well, who, again, she's not an Islamic scholar at all. She's just a writer and she's part of a feminist organization in US. And so, but there's a very famous video of hers where she has convinced so many Muslim women that you don't need to wear hijab. So are you finding that is also adding to the confusion?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are so many women who cite these resources as justifications for why hijab is not mandatory. I think this is a greater problem of how Islam is spoken about in the public sphere, that instead of it being ulama who are, religion specialists, right? They are the experts in this field. Instead of them leading the conversation on what Islam is and is not, or what are Islamic injunctions or what are requirements of faith, it's really these people who have a very academic background, who may have studied the sociology or the anthropology or the history of Islam. Those are important fields, of course, but they are not qualified to speak on the Islamic sciences. And the problem is that they do speak very intelligently about these topics, right? That, to the average eye, if you will, to someone who isn't well versed in these topics, they seem to be experts, right? They can quote the Quran with ease. They can mention a few hadiths. They can, make these references to what we think are explicitly religious texts. And so we take them as experts on the religion. And they're not that. And this is something that's super, super dangerous, not just related to hijab, but in all matters of being. And so I think this is something that we need to be wary of, right? Of who we learn from, where we take knowledge, what does it mean for something to be true? What type of appeals are they making?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to just mention this. So the two very clear evidences in the Quran where Allah does tell women to wear the khimar, the head cover, is Surah Nur, which is Surah 24, Ayah 31. And then in Surah Al-Azab, which mentions the outer garment. And in another section of this podcast, we will discuss, I have a recording of some scholars who do discuss that. So inshallah, that will be part of this podcast. But so then if we shouldn't go to, whether it's a Muslim YouTuber or academics or Muslim feminists, they call themselves Muslim feminists. It's not something I'm labeling them as. So how can a Muslim woman, and who should we go to, and how do we access someone to find out our answers when, to, like you said, not just hijab, anything?
Right. I think the most important thing to look for when you are trying to learn about your religion is whether that individual has a chain that connects them back to the Prophet ﷺ. So our tradition, the way we transmit knowledge is heart to heart, right? We have this isnad, a chain of transmission, right? Where a teacher teaches a student who goes on and teaches their students and so on and so forth, all the way back to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And if they don't have that type of rigorous connection, verifiable connection, and spiritual connection back to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we should not be learning about the religion from them. And that's, again, one of the biggest tragedies in our day is that, everyone feels qualified to speak about things that they are not qualified to speak about. And God forgive me, if I'm doing so right now. But we don't do that with any other field. We wouldn't do that with medicine, for example. We wouldn't learn about coronavirus from a plumber, of what he thinks about the pathophysiology of the disease. But we do that with Islam. And it's so tragic because Islam, or religion in general, doesn't just have consequences for us in this world, but in the next as well. It's a salvational affair. It's so deeply important as the connection that we have with God. And so we need to make sure that we're looking for traditionally, classically trained ulama, who have that type of rigorous training. Just to give like a specific example, someone that I think is really wonderful in this regard. In the US, we have a sheikha named Aisha Prime. She is an American Muslim, right? Like she gets the context in the West. She's been classically trained. And of course, like because she's a woman, she can relate to some of the unique struggles that women may face. So if someone is looking for like a specific example of who to learn from, I would definitely recommend that they, watch her YouTube videos or, look out for some of her work.
Okay, alhamdulillah, because I think this is it. There are people who we can turn to, but it's the for some reason, whether it's instant gratification or we have no patience anymore, it does seem odd that we are going to YouTube to get an answer about that could affect whether we go to Jannah or Jahannam. I think that's where we need to understand it in that way, that this is, like you said, it's not something light. It's going to affect our akhirah. So we should, inshallah, we need to give it that importance and that seriousness.
Yeah. I mean, it's a worthy investment to make. I think it's really nice that we have these like really beautiful, well-produced, like 2-3 minute YouTube videos that, give you that spiritual pick me up, or we have the Jummah khutbah that, talks about 1 or 2 hadiths, and we feel that like spiritual upliftment. That's important and that has its place. But at the same time, like, are we sitting down every day and learning something more about God? Because if we're not progressing forward in our relationship with him, then we're going backwards. You can't stay neutral. You don't stay in the same place. And so and this is a self-assessment you have to do. You have to really reflect on whether you're putting the time in and going through a text with a teacher, going through a course properly.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. And I think nowadays, especially with the online, Islamic courses, it's there now. Alhamdulillah. It's so brilliant. Like I'm doing one at the moment. And so it's out there. Inshallah, we just need to make the intention and make an effort. And if we need to spend our money on this, then that's the best thing to spend our money on, inshallah. So now another thing that I've heard, and you mentioned it in your article, was that, okay, so let's say someone does agree that, yes, wearing the Khimar is an obligation. But then what comes next is people say, but Allah says in the Quran, there's no compulsion in religion. That's Surah 2, Ayah 256. So, and that's used as a justification that to choose, I can choose if I do this or not. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I think again, we would never apply that type of logic to anything other than religion. We would never say that I can choose which prescription medications to take if I have a certain ailment, right? You would listen to the doctor. You would listen to what she said is the best plan of action for your health. And so we need to do the same when it comes to our deen, right? What the ulama have said, not just right now, but for 1400 years of our scholarship, that hijab is a requirement. We need to listen to that, and we need to have that type of intellectual humility to kind of yield to their expertise. And unfortunately, like, we don't have that right now, as we have a very arrogant, do-it-yourself, make-it-yourself version of religion, where I can pick up the Quran, not even read it in the classical Arabic text, read like a English translation, pick out random verses and create my own religion, read a few hadiths and say, look, I've found these justifications and now I know what I need to do. Come on, we know that's not the right approach to take towards our religion. And so we need that type of humility again. And that comes from, again, learning from those who are experts, learning from the ulama. It's really tragic that we feel as if we have those like critical thinking skills or those like critical reasoning skills to apply to the religion, that particularly for those who are in university or might have graduated from university, you learn how to analyze texts, right? You learn how to read a book, how to explore the themes, how to make connections between characters and ideas. And that's really important. important and that has its place, but we shouldn't assume that that qualifies us to do the same with the Quran, especially if we are not even reading it in the actual language it was revealed in. But even if we can read it in classical Arabic, that doesn't mean that we have command over the seerah, for example, or the life of the Prophet ﷺ, or that we have command over fiqh or aqidah or any of these other Islamic sciences. And so really, until we take the time to go through them, become masters of those specific fields, we really should not feel qualified to make any type of prescriptions or conclusions on matters of deen.
Yeah, I completely agree, and and we have to be honest about that. That we're not in a position. And it's interesting, if someone said to me, like if you know you're not qualified to do something, and someone offered you a job, or there was a responsibility, you would say, no, sorry, I can't do that. So we need to say that here as well. I think that just have be humble enough, and it's a bit of a reality check. I think the way that things are, I think it's very quick we just get caught up in this. Everyone's very quick to give a judgment about Islam, about the Quran and Hadith, and it's quite puzzling, and we just need to stop ourselves from doing that. Even if other people are doing it, doesn't mean we have to jump in. The other justification that I've heard a number of times is that, and this is something I hear a lot from women in particular, that the idea of speaking my truth. So, for example, there's now, it seems to be this idea that where, my experience is my truth, and so my hijab experience is my experience, and you can't tell, it makes me happy the way I'm wearing it, and therefore, please back off. Don't preach, or don't tell me what I should be doing or what I shouldn't.
Right. Please to refrain.
So now this is used as it's like a way to cut off the conversation. That, no, sorry, we're not talking about this. I'm not going to wear it, and it doesn't matter what you say to me. It's like I don't even want to listen to what you're going to say to me.
Yeah. I think this relates really well to the previous question, is how we view Islam as being a very individualistic affair, which it is not. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defines each one of us by the relationships we have with others, the responsibilities that we owe them, that we have to them, and the rights that, they need to fulfill for us. And so when we view ourselves as this communal structure, right, as a community, not as just the sum total of individuals, it really begins to challenge some of these ideas of my body, my choice. I'm going to speak my own truth and you can't say anything about it, because we realize that your truth has an impact on my life, right? And if each of us are just shouting our own truths at all times, it creates this cacophony of voices where truth itself has no value anymore. And this is kind of what we're seeing in the postmodern condition, right? Is everyone makes different truth claims all the time. Each of them have their own, justifications or their own qualifications of why their truth is the best. And then at the end of the day, no one really knows what truth is. To give a very simple example of that, it's as if, because this is the Muslim Mom podcast, it's as if every mom said, my child is the best, yes. And anytime any other mom said, well, my child is the best, you just said, no, shut up. My child is the best. And you have your own qualifications of what makes your child the best. Well, she can color really well and he can ride his bike really well. And that's why, my child is the best. And in the end of the day, it means nothing when a mom says that anymore. It makes her feel really good. But we know, that's just something moms say, it doesn't mean if we were to actually rank all the children of the world, this child would come out, to be the best. So I think it's similar in this way of everyone making their own claims of truth, that this is my truth. In the end, it means nothing. And I think this is why it's so important for us to learn our Islamic sciences, is because they don't just teach us, things like fiqh and aqidah, but they teach us how to determine what is truth. So for example, in the hadith sciences, you learn how to evaluate whether a reported saying of the Prophet ﷺ is actually authentic, right? What are some ways that we explore that? What was the context? Who narrated it? What's the chain of transmission? And then you kind of determine, okay, is this a truthful saying, if you will? Is this an authentic saying? And that extends outside of just hadith to, even the secular world, if you will, even to things that non-Muslims say. If they make this claim, if they narrate something, is that true, right? And then how do we authenticate that? So these are skills that we learn through our deen that we apply to everything, right? Because at the end of the day, all of the universe is God's creation. So, what we learn about him, we can apply to everything. And so we need to be really, really wary of this idea of everyone speaking their own truth. It's not an individualistic world. It's not that, in this hierarchy of truth, your experiences don't supersede everything else. And I think that's so uncomfortable for us to realize, because we want to believe we're the center of the world. And I think this is one of the biggest flaws of liberalism, is that it convinces us that our needs and our desires and our choices are at the top of the pyramid and everyone else exists only to fulfill them. And that's simply not true. We have responsibilities to other people. They have rights over us. And we need to recognize the relationships we have within the community. We need to recognize that, if a very popular influencer is saying things like, I'm speaking my truth, that doesn't just impact her life, that impacts the millions of people who follow her and how they begin to understand Islam and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so again, I think it's so, so important for us to learn our religion properly and to remember that, look, as bad as it feels to hear, you're not the center of the world. Your experiences are not the most meaningful thing. There are an abundance, billions of other people out there, and we have obligations to them and to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course.
Yeah, that I know. I think individualism is a real problem, and this kind of very secular and then very individualistic view of Islam is so alien. It's completely the opposite to the idea of community and wanting for your sister what you want for yourself. Because really, even the whole reason why we're having this discussion is not because we think we are superior. It's more the way I see this, and I know you do as well, is that taking the lesson from Surah Asr, that every person will be at loss except those who believe, who do good deeds, and then who advise each other with sabr and with the truth. We have to do that. If we don't do that, then we will be at loss. And so,
right.
Inshallah, that's, I think, again, I hope that, that's coming across in the way that we're discussing it, that at no point do we feel we are superior to any other Muslim sister, whether she's wearing hijab or she wants to wear hijab, inshallah.
Absolutely. And I just want to add on this note, I am not a scholar, right? I'm not even some type of advanced student of knowledge. I'm a very mediocre, average Muslim who is just sharing some reflections on what I'm observing. And I'm only doing this from a place of, when I watched the video that came out earlier this week, and when I'm just observing things that are happening in society, it's not from a place of, or a vindictive place, right? Or a place of superiority, haha, I managed to keep my hijab on and look at what X, Y, and Z is doing. Absolutely not. It comes from a place of sorrow, of what's happening to us. When I have kids, inshallah, one day, what will happen to them? We need to recognize the urgency of these problems, because a'udhu billah, God protect me from this. But if I were to ever go down a specific route, would there be people to look out for me to kind of say, Eeman, this is what's going on. You need to be aware of this, and kind of support me with empathy and bring me back to the straight path. And so, I don't say anything that I do from a place of, inshallah, from a place of superiority, may God protect us from that. It's really just wanting to be better, because we're all like this family, you know, like we have
Yes.
to look out for each other. And if we don't do that, no one else will, you know?
That's right, because now then this is exactly the thing, that we are one family, we are one ummah, and if we look to our past, what like this problem, it's interesting. This is not a modern day problem that we've, as Muslim women, we've our understanding of the obligation of hijab. It's you know, for a long time there. It was never a problem. If we look to our history, only until Western nations came into our countries and colonized us. And again, I would encourage everyone to read. I'm going to say a few names, and you know, please Google them to do your own research. But I'm going to give a very clear, blatant example of when Britain occupied Egypt. The first Controller General. What an interesting name, Controller General in Egypt. His name was, you know, I was thinking, what a weird name. Now they've changed it to ambassador. When I looked up, that word doesn't exist now. They've changed it to ambassadors. So now the first Controller General in Egypt from 1878 to 1879 was a man called Lord Cromer. And he wrote books about his attitudes towards the Muslims and the Egyptian women in particular, and he argued that basically the way that women are treated is basically, he said certain things. Like, so Cromer argued that westernized Christianity elevated the status of women, while Islam taught that women should be degraded through the veil and segregation based on gender. So he had a real problem with Islam. Mm-hmm. He had a problem with the fact that women wore hijab, and you think again, and so what he had a very clear agenda to get women in Egypt to remove their veil. Now, the best way to do that is if you can undermine a person's understanding of their religion, like forcibly trying to take it off would have had the opposite effect. So then what he did was that he encouraged and influenced. There was this very famous book written by Farhat Amin. He was an Egyptian jurist who'd studied in Europe, and he was a reformer. He a self-proclaimed reformer of Islam. And he wrote a book called The Liberation of Women, in which he blamed Egyptian women's veiling, their lack of education, and their slavery to Egyptian men, to Islam. And so Farhat Amin was influenced by Lord Cromer. And so he writes this book, and then this book is, you know, read by the elites and the educated people in Egypt. And they started to take these ideas on board. And so what you had was that then people started thinking, is hijab causing us to be backward? If we became more like the West and look at the way their women are, they mix freely with men, they don't cover, you know, that. And so they then started to question the Islamic rules. And that had a knock-on effect on, so, you know, the understanding of the family. And then that, you know, and in Islam, the family is so important. And so the mother being there for the family, taking care of the family. If you take women out of the family and put her into work and into study, and you've told her that the problem is, the thing that's keeping you back is Islam, then for the British in particular in Egypt, it was then a way they had changed the whole way. Instead of the Egyptians hating the occupation, you now had people who loved their occupiers, and you see they did that in a number of countries. And just then moving on, there's a very famous Egyptian feminist called Huda Sharawi. Now, what she did was in 1922, she did a public unveiling of herself. And she did this after returning from the International Women's Suffrage Alliance conference in Rome. And that was a feminist conference. And again, what we see there is that Muslim people, and then the elites mainly, them being influenced very clearly by non-Muslim ideas. And after mixing with non-Muslims, they got influenced. And then we could look at other countries with quite a similar pattern. But the thing we see here is that Muslims didn't have a problem at all. You know, it wasn't even an issue. Sometimes people say, why do we keep talking about hijab? Why are we obsessed with it? Now, the thing is, we are not, but we can't, if people are going to, so back then in Egypt, the Muslims didn't have, I'm sure there weren't, no, actually that's not right of me to say that. Were they able to counteract this, this onslaught and this attack against hijab? Now, unfortunately, they weren't able to. And what happened was the religious, the kind of uneducated Muslims, that's not a derogatory term, but the ones who, what they did, they just became quite conservative, and they thought, no, we need to keep our women at home even more to protect them from this.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't the best thing to do. What we really need to do is understand, okay, if as an example, Lord Cromer, he was doing this in Egypt, but at the same time, he was the head of the anti-suffrage movement in England. And he was against women in Britain getting the vote. And what and so it was complete hypocrisy. And what we can see is he wasn't actually a feminist at all. He didn't care about the Egyptian women and their liberation. He just realized, I can use these liberal ideas to help the occupation that we are doing in Britain. It justifies the occupation. And I think so it's worth understanding the history behind where we are today, because because what I'm thinking, that was in the past, that was like the really blatant attack on hijab, but do you think that still happens now, but in a more subtle way?
Absolutely. I think this idea of divide and conquer is something that the British excelled at. They perfected it, and it's utilized all over the world now. So this idea of dividing men against women and convincing these Muslim countries, particularly Muslim women, that it's Muslim men who are oppressing them, that it's the men who are forcing you to veil yourselves and seclude yourselves from the sight of society, and you need to rebel against them, and you need to agitate for your rights, and you need to take off your veil. This is a technique that has been used all over the world by colonizers. And then even in recent history, we see how the US, one of the justifications for invading Afghanistan was this manufactured sob story about how, Afghan women are being oppressed, that we need to go liberate them and we need to save them. And that's why, the US military needs to invade the country, and completely decimate it, of course. Look at the state of Afghanistan now. After more than a decade, US occupation has not improved the condition of that country. It's only made it worse. And so we see how women are used as tokens in this way for greater aims, whether that's political pursuit of power, whether that's financial ambitions that these colonizers or imperialists have, whether it's just a desire to advance their own philosophies and ideologies about the world. We need to recognize whether women are being used as tokens in this way, especially when that type of tokenism is dressed in the garb of feminism. Because on the surface, it seems as if women are being empowered, but actually we're just being reduced, into objects. We're just being used, and I think this is not just something that we see in politics or on a major nation state level, but this is in a very insidious way what we see with, to bring it back to influencers, what we see with them as well is how they kind of think about success, what they view as success or a thriving job or career, whether that really empowers women or whether it just reduces us into our bodies again. Have we really progressed from being seen as just mere objects for male pleasure, or when we post these beautifully photoshopped selfies with specific contours of our body on display, are we really being liberated from the male gaze? Are we really being respected as, divine creations, is our sanctity being appreciated in this way? And I have to say no, I really don't think that we are being empowered through these types of actions. I think we are falling into the same type of capitalistic view that popular society has about women, where we are just our bodies and we just extract financial gain or worldly success from using our bodies in this way. And it's really unfortunate, because our bodies are an amana. And this is what I write about in the article, is that it's a trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gave us these physical forms, not so we display them and parade them, particularly for the gaze of people who don't even know us or like us, but just for His worship. That's what we're here for. So we need to return to that type of God consciousness again. And this is true for both men and women, women who may display their form and men who may view the form. That is a violation of the amana, as well as when Muslim men look at women they should not be looking at and engage with influencers or, any woman in that way.
I think that, we can, I think there are things that we can do. Like, for example, one of the, we should think very carefully about the culture that we are consuming, where, any popular culture, whether it's on, if we choose who we follow. So if there are, so we shouldn't follow, if we don't like it when the, Muslim influencers do certain things, then we shouldn't follow them. They only exist because, partly, I know there's also, everyone can buy fake followers, so and you can buy views. So there's definitely that going on, but we shouldn't consume that. If they don't have a platform that we're consuming them on, then and even for our own mental health and our own view of understanding of Islam, we should not follow people who are going to who are not going to bring us closer to Allah. I think that's one of the things I've now started to do, that I've removed anyone who doesn't make me more God conscious. I don't want to see their videos. I don't want to see their pictures.
Right.
What else do you think we could do to about this, about what we've spoken about? What could we practically do?
Yeah, so I think in general, like, curating your consumption is really important. So anything you view through your eyes, or basically anything you consume through your five senses, you should be very deliberate about, because that has tangible impact, not just on this world, but the next. And it's not always just about your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also your relationship with yourself. So if you're constantly viewing these Instagram personalities who have, let's say, for example, a small nose, right? And this is something that is really prominent in our community, right? Yeah. You'll want a small nose, and you'll begin to kind of question your self-beauty and your worth and your et cetera, et cetera. So it's not always just about, religion or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, although that is the most important thing to be wary of. It's also how you view yourself and how you view this amana He's given you. He made you in the best form, right? He knew better. So being conscious of that. And this is something that, that you are influenced by not just Muslim personalities, by non-Muslim ones as well. So I would say, like, being conscious of what you're seeing through your eyes, what you're listening to, the type of music, the type of TV shows, the books you're reading, like, being really, really deliberate about all of those things is important. And then, of course, like, connecting with Islam in a really authentic, traditional way. So, like, taking the time to really learn, spending time in the company of people who are maybe further down this path towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than you, who may have more knowledge. Just sitting in their company is so important, even if it's not specifically to learn something. Just hanging out with them is really important, because at least you'll save yourself from things like backbiting or, definitely things like shirk, but even like small sins that we kind of think are not that important, but really are. Just being in their company, that'll protect you. And I think things like mentorship are so important in that regard, of like making sure that particularly young Muslim women, but now increasingly even older Muslim women, identifying people who really celebrate their faith and have have accomplished something because of their faith and not in despite of it. People who recognize how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has opened doors for them, reaching out to them and learning from them and being there for one another.
Well, yeah, I was just, one last thing what you were just saying, that I think also we have to be very careful what we share, as in, especially when it comes to Islamic knowledge. So I'll give you an example. Someone, they actually, I'm happy they sent it to me because this helped me with my, when I was researching this topic, that it was an article in the Huffington Post, and it was Huffington Post CA, so that's a Canadian one. And it had in the title, now we need to be very careful who we gain our Islamic knowledge from. The title said, Muslim scholars who say the hijab is not an obligation. It was something like that, but it was quite a very clear title that here are Muslim scholars who say hijab is not an obligation. And then the way it was written was very well written. The name of the journalist was, so it's Huffington Post, so you think, oh, that's credible. The name of the author was, the writer was Muslim. And then it had 5 or 6 different names. Now, when I checked each one, I'll be honest, every single one was dubious. As in, I couldn't find again, like you said, where did they study? Where's their Islamic studies from? Or it was very vague. I couldn't find links to where they had come from. And then in every paragraph, there was no evidence. There was no ayah, no hadith, no whose tafsir are they basing it on? Some said Muslim mystics, some just used some words, but it was written as if this is fact and this is the truth. Right. And then when I Googled the author, he's co-authored a book on basically Islam and how Islam on the topic of same-sex marriages and how it's permissible and how it should be permissible. So then, and then I looked at the other articles he wrote, which were all relating to LGBT, not all of them, a majority. So now, but if you just read the article, you would believe what they said. That there are valid opinions and they're scholars, Islamic scholars who've done this. So now, what I'm saying is that we need to check thoroughly who the writers are, what the sources are, and then we shouldn't share that information with those links with those articles until we check, because that will just add to the confusion. And that's
this is the era of fake news, we need to be really aware of that, especially like if you live in the US, you have Trump as your president, how big of a problem fake news is, and all over the world, people know that, those WhatsApp forwards you get from aunties are not like some factual, they're not like factual statements, right? Like we are discerning when it comes to Auntie Shagufta and the community sending us the cure for coronavirus, but we're not discerning when it's, Ahmed XYZ writing a beautiful paper in the Huffington Post. But we need to be, right? We need to realize everyone has an agenda. Everyone has a specific philosophy they're trying to forward or promote to people. And so we need to be discerning in that as well.
Yes, alhamdulillah. Well, Jazakallah khair, Eeman. So you can all read the article on traversing tradition. I would definitely, we didn't actually cover all the points in there. So that is one article, inshallah, I would recommend to forward to your friends and family. Inshallah, Eeman, you must come on again, because I'm sure
I would love to.
Yeah, we could speak about. But inshallah, take care. And again, Jazakallah khair so much for taking the time to come on.
Thank you, Waiki. It was my pleasure.